All right, we'll call the meeting of the Human Resources, Finance, and Property Committee to order. First item is Pledge of Allegiance. Please rise. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. No one has approached me or the acting clerk?
No one.
He's a man of many talents, but neither of us were approached for public comment. So we'll move on to the minutes from the June 11th meeting, which were in your packet. What are your wishes? Moved by Chair Gibbs. Is there a second? Seconded by Supervisor Lemmer to approve the minutes of the previous meeting. Although, any discussion? If not, all those in favor will signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, no. That motion carries. Is there anybody online?
We do have one individual online with first four digits 7152, last two digits 18. If you could identify yourself, we'd appreciate it. Thank you.
Supervisor Reynolds.
Okay.
Thank you, Supervisor.
So we have 5 members here, 1 online. So we'll move on to item 5B, consideration of revised fund balance policy. Sam, I think you're going to take that?
Yeah.
Or Lance, or who's ever going to take it?
Sam will take the substantive part, but teeing this up again, this has been I'll say a priority for the committee to really implement more of a plain language approach to our fund balance policies to help individuals when they read the calculation that the math actually kind of follows the language that is in the policy, but also really to use as an educational tool for the board. So you previously looked at the working capital designation policy, which is at the tail of this fund balance policy, because as Sam covered in the presentation to the full board recently, the working capital designation is at its core a portion of your overall fund balance policy, but based on the direction from this committee and our longstanding practices regarding fund balance and working capital designation, Sam put together the overall fund balance policy with the working capital designation in it, so she can walk you through it, and we're happy to answer any questions.
In the packet is a draft of the fund balance policy for consideration. While drafting the policy, I looked at guidance from the GASB, which is Governmental Accounting Standards Board, as well as other counties, in addition, reviewing our own fund balance policies that we had. The first part of this fund balance policy is to offer some insight and background information as to the importance of a fund balance policy. It's important to note that this fund balance policy only addresses governmental funds. For a little bit of context, when we look at funds, we're talking about governmental or proprietary. Proprietary are things like solid waste and highway, and then the insurance funds. So again, this is pretty much everything else. The next part.
I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
Proprietary included which groups?
It includes the enterprise funds and internal service funds. So it's like solid waste and highway, and then our health and property insurance. The next part of the policy gives us the definitions of the different types of funds under the governmental funds. So we've got the general fund, the special revenue fund, debt service, and capital projects funds that are there. The next portion is the definitions of the fund balance classifications. This is in alignment with GASB 54. So around 2011 is when it was implemented, but a lot of counties went through with resolutions to spell out the different classifications within the fund balance. So you've got your non-spendable, restricted, committed, assigned, and unassigned. Moving to the next portion, we have the order of fund balance spending. The reason to classify the order of fund balance spending is to make sure that we use the most restricted, allowing us to have the flexibility for additional fundings or available fundings should the need arise. The next portion is the minimum fund balance, which is in alignment with the working capital policy. And then the next portion that is in there is the non-lapsing or contingent accounts. This is something that we added in to have some stability accounts to kind of mitigate against the volatility with governmental operations. In that portion, it does still require to have approval through the committee in order to utilize any of those funds. The next part of that policy is equipment replacement and capital repair funds. This was in response to several conversations that have happened throughout the county to make sure that we have funds for maintenance and repairs, equipment that we're purchasing that we're aware of, just making sure that we have that funding in place in the long term. After all of that, we do have the working capital policy just for the governmental funds. So if you read through that, it should mimic what we discussed in our meeting where we went over the working capital policy. The only change to it is that it specifically refers to governmental funds. So then when you go down into where it's designated, which should be the the third paragraph down, it says it shall be recorded in the unassigned fund balance for the general fund for all governmental funds that receive tax levy. Other than that, the last change to make sure that it said general fund was under the implementation and monitoring.
So I know that was a lot, but as Sam said, we really tried to pull a lot of the conversations that, excuse me, this committee has had over the last many months, if not years, quite honestly. And, we really tried to highlight the definitions. If you go back to the fund balance policy near the top, when we talk about what are those classifications within fund balance, that mirrors the language that was included in the memo as part of the budget last year to really address some of the questions that were offered. As we also said in the budget presentation last week, trying to demonstrate this idea that, again, fund balance is not all spendable dollars, right? It's this idea of what constitutes fund balance? How are the different classifications important? How do they drive spending? As Sam alluded, so we pulled a lot of that information. A lot of it is very consistent across numerous counties. So we had a couple of counties that we pulled a lot of, again, the definitions, pulled those from GASB. The minimum targets for working capital those were previously provided to you. And I do know, I want to be very transparent relative to the non-lapsing and contingent accounts. This is an area, again, you did not give direction that you wanted it in or expressly out. We included it for your consideration and further discussion. But just to highlight a couple of key points on that non-lapsing and contingent piece, these are not funds that the departments have access to spend in any form or fashion. They are accounts that would exist should there be a excess revenue over expense in any given year. That account would then be populated with those funds. County approval through this committee and the full board would be required. That said, you'll see later you might ask, well, why? Chris is going to give you a couple of presentations on at least a project or two to highlight that these might be areas where we would have tapped into those things. The sheriff's office, for example, you're going to get an update on the jail intercom system and the door mechanisms. It's going to be more information than probably you want to know about that system and how it's quite costly. With respect to clerk of courts and district attorney, for example, you've read my budget message before. If they do have a big trial where you have to sequester a jury, for example, for a week or 2 weeks, those costs can be substantial. So those are the sort of things that I would envision having those non-lapsing contingent accounts for. Again, they'd have to come to this body and the full board to expend them, but wanted to be very transparent that is in that draft. That is entirely up to you as the policy body, whether you want to move in that direction. Equipment repair or replacement and capital repair, again, something that this county has talked about for a long time to do a better job we made a lot of headway, I should say, with a rolling stock replacement policy and some updates you've made there. But all those things are, again, baked into that fund balance policy that you have before you with that working capital designation policy, again, embedded in it, because as we talked about at the budget education meeting, working capital is a component of your overall fund balance. So we're happy to answer any questions. If you want to make modifications, certainly we can capture your notes and bring you back a revised version, but we wanted to at least get it in front of all of you.
So I have a question relative to, we talked about the highway fund as being a proprietary fund. Is that all of their balance or a portion of their balance?
It should be all of their balance.
And what have we historically treated it as a proprietary?
Correct. So if you look in the financial statements, you'll see typically two parts. You'll see the governmental funds or the governmental activities, and then you'll see business type, activities that are in there. And again, they're referred to as either governmental funds or proprietary funds. It's just the overarching umbrella of their classification.
So are proprietary funds separate and distinct? So I think one of the reasons we're having the discussion is because the highway fund is so healthy, and it has grown. And I think that there are a good number of county board members that feel, and I would put myself in a category of would like to see some of that lapse into the capital fund. How would we go about doing that? Is it possible to establish a proprietary fund with caps?
What I would recommend is having a separate working capital policy for the highway fund in addition to our fund balance policy, which again addresses the governmental funds. But under highway, we'd have the working capital just specifically for highway, kind of similar to what we have now, to address that. The one thing that we do have to be somewhat careful about is that in the highway fund, some of those monies are restricted in how they can be used. So they may have to be used in the highway fund for capital replacement. I don't know that we'll be able to move it over into the capital improvements fund where the general fund moves theirs. But again, as it sits right now, there is capital improvement funds that are used to assist with the highway capital needs.
Chair Gibbs?
So on that same line, so the struggle I think some people have is in our financials are all those proprietary funds, airport, solid waste, highway, social services, other proprietary funds. Is there somewhere in our policy that we can spell out what those proprietary funds are so that we don't get confused and understand that we could potentially use those as fund balance or working capital? Because they're not working capital. I think they're clearly distinct difference, but I don't know that we've spelled out all of the different proprietary funds that we currently have, and they should be looked at separately. And even though they're part of the fund balance on our financials, they're not part of our spendable per se working capital.
Okay. Go ahead. So part of where that comes into play is the fund type definition. So you got your general fund, you got your special revenue fund, which the social improvement fund is part of a special revenue fund. Opioids in there, ARPA, capital. We do have a specific one for capital projects and one for debt service. When we look at the financial statements, depending if you want to specify that in here, there are some counties that spell out exactly which funds are included in here. We can most certainly add that. The other thing that you can do is you can kind of refer to the financial statements, and in there they do have the governmental funds and they break it down per fund. And then later on they do show the proprietary funds to have highway, solid waste, and then on the right-hand side is the internal service funds, which is your insurance funds.
So I guess to Sam's point, would that be, and to Chair Gibbs's point, we can certainly bring that back. As Sam said, we tried to Goldilocks this policy, pulling from some counties that had more. Certainly there are a number that have far less. If additional information or expansion in that area is something you want, we can bring that back.
Supervisor Lammer.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And on that line, I'm a visual learner, so something maybe with a flow chart to show what's nested underneath, more of a picture instead of bullet points under a list would be helpful for somebody like me. And can I ask a question that's not really related to that? But,
It depends
well, it's.
how related it is and
it's
germane it is.
Non-lapsing in the contingent accounts. Do we have any information on, or opinions on if those are the right amounts? For instance, have they been spent in the past? If so, to what level? I don't know.
Well, to be very frank with you and transparent, we looked at Chippewa County was really the one that, in speaking with their former administrator, they had much higher balances and they tried to pare those back. But he did express to me that there was value in having some of those. Sam and I just came up with those based on kind of what our thought process was in terms of really what projects would we be looking at. So again, I gave you the examples for the DA's office. I went the wrong way on that. Sorry, the DA's office and the clerk of courts. Their budget, their respective budget for those kind of big trials, they don't have a lot of those come through. It's not like we can say, hey, every year we have one jury that we anticipate having sequestration for a week or 2 weeks. But when they come through, I mean, I've served as a lawyer on one, and it's a big deal when you have a big case like that, and the DA's office has significant expert witness fees. If you're flying in experts from out of state, you're incurring those costs, and likewise the clerk of court's office having to put 14, 15, 16 people in a hotel room for 10 days, feed them during that entire time. I mean, that just is money that they don't budget for. So we tried to essentially say, what would these funds be used for? And we didn't include every department. That is something that is, Chippewa had a lot longer list of departments where they had them. We really tried to pick what's most likely to come. Conservation, planning, and zoning, the things that they're looking for are software related or ortho imagery updates. So we tried that would be a capital project that they would, I'm sure, save up over a number of years. And it might be a good inducement to get them to do that, to say, hey, once you get to 100,000, we'll be able to use that to offset a significant portion of those ortho imagery costs. The sheriff's office in the jail, quite honestly, that was something we just look at when something happens in the jail, it's a bit more expensive, and we thought having a higher dollar amount was there. And then just a general account for the sheriff's office because equipment comes up. The veterans office, that was strategic. There's a Veterans Service Commission fund that is permitted by statute, and Marathon County has funded. Essentially what it allows for is there's a specific commission, the Veterans Service Commission, that receives requests from veterans to access funds for various things. It can be first month's rent, based on some financial circumstances the individual has. And that fund, you have not contributed to tax levy to that in a great many years. But the statutes allow levy to go toward it. This would be a way that if they had an excess of revenue over expense in a budget year, you would essentially be able to say those funds can be available to then be applied to the Veterans Service Commission, so you don't need to essentially use direct tax levy through the budget process.
So just to be clear, these are new?
Absolutely, you do not have any of these.
That was-
Yep, sorry, should have started with that. This is that part, to be very transparent, you don't need to have these. You have of course, your general contingency fund is lapsing. That's the difference between what is talked about here, a non-lapsing. This would roll over, absent the board approval to use it, it would sit there, but then should you have a thing, like again, in the clerk of courts, should they have a large trial and you're wondering where do you take that fund for the jury sequestration, it could be specific from this as opposed to having to go to your general contingency fund.
Chair Gibbs.
So on that same lines on the non-lapsing, so to effectively fulfill or fill the non-lapsing accounts, in this year, if at the end of the year, the department has excess budgeted amounts that were unused, it would first go in to fill this account. And then if there's any excess of that, that would then go to CIP. Is that the practice that we're talking about?
Yeah, so in theory, let's say clerk of courts ended up with an extra $100,000, $10,000 would go to that non-lapsing contingent account. The other $90,000 then would go down into the general fund to be in consideration for moving over to the CIP fund.
Is that post-audit, in the year of the audit? So is there the lag that we have with the KIP fund or not?
Yes, because in order to kind of close out the departments and the fund in its entirety, we always wait until after audit. Should something in the auditing process change, we then account for it appropriately in that fashion.
Supervisor Lammer.
All right, so then when you look at the order of fund balance spending, how does how do these accounts get prioritized by a department, for instance?
So in the case of clerk of courts, and we're just going to pick on them because they're coming up, rather than having them go to, they'd end up going to a restricted source of funding first before they went to a committed, before they went to assigned, before they went to unassigned. So before we started seeking contingency funds or going into our fund balance to then fulfill whatever need is there, they'd have to take from those restricted or committed funds depending on how that designation is made.
I have a quick question for Chris. Is orthophotography a capital or an operating expense?
I'd say that probably fits in the kind of area that subscription as a service projects are. It's software, but its application is over time, and how it's used is not like an air handler or something like that. So it's I wouldn't call it a gray area, but I would think the amount of funding involved and the length of time that it's used for ties it more towards capital, at least for the discussion. And I would say you'd want to include it on a KIP just for awareness sake. Even if you wanted to fund it some other way, you'd still be able to account for it and know that it's coming. That's when I look at those items, and there's a couple, like CCITC has more of those now because you're moving away from hardware and servers to everything in the cloud. So it's similar in that regard, from my opinion.
And I would say that's how we've historically budgeted it or looked at it is it is a project-based request that comes through the budget, similar to a master plan. You've seen in past years, facility master plans have been included on our spreadsheet for capital improvement planning. Ortho imagery updates, they come every several years. I think the challenge, and if I were Lori Miskimmons before you today, I think one of her challenges she would express to you is that it's really hard for when you compare updating ortho imagery against roofs. The roof always wins out over, well, we really need some better pictures. But that said, those pictures are really, really, really important. So this idea would be, it would be a tool perhaps should, and again, it's a tool that the board gets to use, not departments. I think that was the thing that enticed me about Chippewa County's approach. It might get the department to work really hard to fill, as Chair Gibbs said, to get that account up to the max. And then that would be available for the department then to come to this body and the full board to say, hey, this amount of funding is here. It can be used to fund all or a portion of a project that otherwise might not ever rise to the top.
Chair Gibbs, then Supervisor Limber.
So these funds would be utilized by the department outside of the budget process, but would require authorization from this committee and the full board, or just this committee? So I guess the question.
I think that would matter. Yes, and your second question would be depending on however you wanted to do it. I would say you said outside the budget. The other thing you could do, right, is if through the budget process, we know we have $100,000 in conservation planning and zoning. Now I'll pick on them as opposed to the clerk of courts. You could say during the budget building process, you want to use that to perhaps mitigate some tax levy through the budget for operations. I think it's these are much more advantageous. I saw the value, again, in talking with the former administrator from Chippewa, more on the capital side or the unforeseen event side, like I referenced with the clerk of courts and the district attorney's office. But you could, as a budget building strategy, essentially it would be it's akin to a rollover.
But just again, I mean, as the general practice would be, these funds would be set aside for except for the fact that the board could budget and use them up, they would be set aside for special occasions, special circumstances. Rather than going to contingency, they would be utilized here. Okay.
I would argue that that's why we have a contingency fund of $800,000. And I guess I have concerns, and I'll be honest, I think the administration level is high in there. In so much, I know that you may funnel it to other departments, but I think that's why we have a contingency fund. And the ortho photos, I think we ought to be building into I want an honest, true KIP that looks at things and schedules them out so that we've got a better idea. I'm leery of creating separate funds in departments for those types of situations. I'd rather be honest and say, here's our capital, and even if we want to say, and software budget, but I'd feel personally more comfortable with that than I would. And yes, it is images versus projects, but we make that decision every single budget, every time we make a spending priority. So I don't know that it would change it. I'm leery, given some of the feedback we got from the board, is if you create too many fund balances, it looks like you're trying to stash away money so that we don't spend it on tax relief and others. And I'd rather be narrower in scope in the hopes that there would be some integrity to that fund balance policy and there would be greater acceptance by the board of the true underlying purpose of why we're carrying over funds. Just a personal observation based upon my experience and what I'm sensing from other board members. Chair Gibbs.
This is Supervisor Marshall.
Go ahead.
I was wondering, how often do you envision reporting on where we're at with these fund balances compared to our policy? Sam?
Looking in the future, once we kind of get this ferreted out, quarterly would be a goal to set forth for the upcoming future.
Okay. And then on the mandatory or minimum fund balance, it says audited actual operating expenditures. Could you define what's included in that expenditure list? if it could be more defined of, I'm sure it's the non-proprietary, is that what I'm sensing?
Yeah, so that's spelled out a little bit more clearly in the working capital policy. The operating expenditures are the total expenditures less any transfers out. So when we look at the working capital designation, we're utilizing any funds that receive tax levy. So in this case, something like the opioid fund would not be included because it does not receive tax levy, but social improvements, which does receive tax levy, would be included.
And then I did see a policy for our health insurance and our dental reserve fund. Is that a separate policy?
Yes, it
That would fall under the,
proprietary.
yeah, correct me if I'm wrong, Sam, but that would be one of those proprietary ones. If you want to, would that be another area once we get, of course, not to move on before we're done, but if there's a additional clarification needed in kind of how those funds work and what the policies are that drive them, we could bring that to this committee. But as Sam said, every county policy that I looked at does kind of pull those out, to your direct question, Vice Chair. It pulls those out because they're governed by, again, a different practice. It's really an in and out.
Well, I just know that that's necessary for us to consider. Looking at self-funding versus not is where are we at with our reserves? So I would be just interested in finding out where we're at with that one. And I agree with Chair Robinson that I would rather see us keep a general contingency fund rather than all these specific, just because we have not had to use it for the last 3 years, and it would be a catch-all rather than setting aside specific departmental non-lapsing funds would be my preference. But thank you.
Chair Gibbs?
I think, though, the one thing, and I appreciate at least the healthy discussion about these non-lapsing contingent accounts. But because when we look at what we had this year already, I think we budgeted 800,000 in contingency, but we've already spent almost half of that, or better than half of that, or allocated more than half of that.
Thank you, yes.
Probably appropriately saying allocated. So I think, and we're going to hear about some potential issues that we're going to be looking at for the sheriff's department, the jail specifically, on a CIP project. I think to the chair's point, if we need to increase our contingency fund because of these potentials here that we see, I would be in favor of doing that, because this is effectively 500,000 that you're going to effectively be taking out of CIP 2 years from now. But also, I do think that, in some cases, we probably are underfunding our potential contingency account.
Go ahead, Minister.
And of course, what I really appreciate the discussion, and staff will bring you back any additional information that you want, and we'll make certainly any changes. It occurs to me, and I appreciate the feedback on, are there certain departments where maybe it would make sense? This is the smallest dollar amount in the entire list, but I do think it's important because I've never had a really good answer to the Veterans Service Commission funding mechanism, because right now, I don't know, Sam, if you know off the top of your head, it's a purely pop quiz. But I want to say it's $5,000-6,000 is in there. It's not a lot of money. But that balance has been continually being reduced, and we haven't put tax levy into that as far as I can recall since I've been an administrator, and actually during my predecessor's time, I recall conversations where, hey, we really work hard, and our staff still continue to work hard to mitigate the need to dip into that. That said, over the last several years, that commission has allocated more of those funds than they had historically. Not going to make any judgments as to whether it was a good idea or what, or why. I would assume part of it is the economic situation that just exists and some strife in that area, but some strategy with respect to that fund, I think would be helpful. And again, to Chair Robinson's point, I really do appreciate, we've made a lot of progress on our 5-year capital improvement plan. We still have a long way to go, as Chris will kind of walk you through. But I don't know what the methodology is to try to make sure we have funding for things that are important, but probably never score as highly as things like roofs and boilers and air handlers. And again, I'm going to pick on CPZ with ortho imagery because that has been put off in the past. So really good discussion. Let us know. I mean, if the consensus is to pull that out, the non-lapsing contingency account thing, we certainly can do that. There's a reason I think I said a number of times, I want to make very clear it's in there. It doesn't need to be. We can absolutely take it out. But I'll ask it this way, if there are any
Sure.
significant concerns about doing that?
Chair Gibbs.
So just a question, if we did put these funds in place, this still would require, at least in my vision, a 2/3 majority vote of the full board, because even though it's in the fund, let's say the fund is fully funded, and then we have a project coming from CPZ that says, I need 80,000 of it for imagery. It's not been budgeted for as far as an expenditure, so so I guess I'll throw the question to Corp Counsel, would it not require a 2/3 majority of the board?
I guess it depends on how you allocate those funds, sorry.
No,
If-
please.
If it is part,
Attorney Fenske will answer
Yes.
that.
if it's done in, since we're picking on CPZ here, if they're looking at their ortho photography and we've used it more like a designation for a long-term project, which is more of an operational aspect, and now we come to the year where we're going to conduct it, and we elect in the budgeting process to utilize that fund from fund balance, then in essence, it's approved in the budgeting process. It wouldn't have to go to the board. If in the middle of the year, all of a sudden they have some new program that they need and they need to utilize that funding, then it would have to go through this committee and the full board for a 2/3 vote because it will amend their budget, which according to our ordinances, any increases need to go through you.
Yeah, like I said, I mean, if we use it in the budget process, obviously, it's understandable that it's just a simple majority when the budget is approved, but if it's outside the budget process and a project comes up that they're going to utilize those funds, that's what I was getting at. So, I mean, the board and the committee really still have, the board still has the final say on the spending of those dollars, either through the budgetary process or through a special, budget amendment process.
So I think the administrator was looking for a sort of directional indication of whether we want it in or out. Or parts in or out. All, none, or some, A, B, or C, unless you've got a D. Chair Gibbs.
I guess in order to, I would like to know, more specifically, some of the past projects that we have gone to capital or to the contingency fund on behalf of those departments and utilize contingency funding. so that before I throw the baby out with the bathwater, I at least understand what those, the likelihood of those being utilized in special circumstances and/or in budgeting circumstances.
And quite honestly, we've used fund balance as much as we've used contingency in the recent past relative to some of those projects such as the jail and others where we've had a larger project in excess of our contingency fund. We've gone right to our reserves to pay for that. And that continues to be an option available for those larger projects. But you wouldn't do that for an orthophotography expenditure or for a special trial out of fund balance. You'd want to look at that contingency or other fund approach. So are there strong feelings do you want to see perhaps 5 years, 7 years? It may be worthwhile going back pre-pandemic because I think that might give us a better indication. I know we've had some large trials where the clerk's office and expert witnesses where the DA's office is had extensive expenditures, but if we could do that and then come back and look at it again.
We can go back and try to get some of that information if, again, pop quiz for me, I don't have the budget sitting in front of me, but there have been a number of years where you actually didn't utilize contingency.
At all.
So we'll try to go back, and I really do appreciate the discussion about, quite honestly, the comments about the administration line. We would be, as I think you referenced, it would probably be me coming on behalf of another department anyway, so it strikes me as perhaps unnecessary. So if you were looking for that middle of, hey, maybe some make sense, administration probably is a good one to pull out of that list. But we can go back and try to find what your projects have been. I would simply say also my recollection of your contingency spending over the last several years, you've used that for things that came up that needed to be done, not for things that, this is a novel project or a nice to have. It's really been used for things that needed to happen. And again, I think that's a function of, as we referenced in the budget presentation, tighter and tighter budgets limit your ability to use operating levy for things that you would like to, as Chair Robinson referenced, that in a perfect world, you'd put in as an operating expense. Some of these subscription as a service pieces that Chris referenced and others, but we'll do our best to go back and find some historical contingency spend. But my sense is right now, you have not used it as much as you might otherwise think.
So, and also in that context, if we get a little bit more information on the proprietary funds as well, if that's doable. Are there other things, as long as the administrator and the finance director are going back and looking at historical spending, that you'd like to see? No. I think I heard Vice Chair Marshall talk about the proprietary funds and others and others. Are we heading in the general direction where this is helpful to you in understanding and you think will be helpful to the board? Seeing consensus. So I think thank you for your efforts to get this to this point, and you're dealing with people that don't deal with this on a regular basis. So bear with us as we try to set that policy so it can be understood by all. So thank you. All right, with that, we'll bring something back at maybe our next meeting. I'd like to try to get this done early in the budget process so we can as we begin to look at priorities and other things, we have a clear understanding of what funds are available. Thank you. Chair Gibbs?
Just one other question. So we're going through the budget. If we were to adopt this today, would we utilize the rollover from the 2024 audit fund this for 2027? Question? I guess it's up to us, I'm assuming, but I'm just curious, if we adopted this fund balance policy, when are we talking about implementation? Because I think it provides clarity to what our rollover is going to be for CIP, or our rollover is going to be for working capital, but it clearly is possibly somewhat different than our current convoluted calculation. So I think, to the chair's point, I think the sooner that we get that policy and adopt it, that we can apply it to the audited results for this year.
What I would foresee is if it was adopted today, that it would take effect with the 2025 financials, therefore affecting, like you said, the 27 CIP rollover. Some of this then could, in theory, if the contingency funds or the non-lapsing individual accounts were approved, they could be utilized in '26. So again, depending on when and the preference on when it's implemented.
We could have a phased approach potentially too, where you might apply some in '26 and some in '27, depending upon what we decide. So we could look at, maybe if we give some thought, it would make sense to try to carry it over in the future, but, implement it going forward, which would be this fiscal year. Sure.
Well, especially if the working capital requirements, I think, are an increase based on this policy at the direction that this committee had recommended, move to 25% minimum. That may affect, will affect the rollover to CIP. And so I think we need to have understanding of what that rollover potential is, so that if we implement it over a phased approach rather than cutting off all of the rollover to CIP, if that were the case. So.
Yeah, that was going to be my point. I mean, I think Sam's layout of that is good, in that it would allow you the opportunity. I think I'm just going to say what you said differently. You would know whether or not you wanted to, perhaps, in light of the creation, should you create some non-lapsing contingent accounts, departmental contingent accounts, you might make changes to what you put into general CIP. So having that take effect with the 2025 financials, I think, makes sense for that.
All right. Sam?
Just a little context with the working capital calculation. When we were revamping it and looking at putting it in more clear and understanding language, I did look at our last working capital policy that went through the audit process, so 23s, not 24s, and we were already somewhat in line with that 25 to 30. So even with the new policy, we're still in that ballpark.
All right. Well, thank you. Good discussion. Again, thank you for your work on this. We'll now run to 6A, initial presentation of capital improvement project requests and software. And project.
And software.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And before I get going, Lori would kill me if I didn't stand up for ortho imagery's importance to the Register of Deeds, real estate transactions, and others. But yes, that being said, I'm here today to just do a hop, skip, and a jump through this first list of CIP projects, which, as you know, is just a potential list. It's what people have submitted as requests. It's not funded. It's not approved. It's just what we're starting to work with. And in the document in your packet, I've highlighted a few areas just to kind of stop and talk for 10, 15 seconds about how I would probably be bringing those forward to the committee in the near future. Overall, the requests, not including this top portion, which is not funded by CIP, includes a portion of highway reserve funding. So that if you take that highway reserve funding potential out, it's roughly $10 million in requests. If you go through the departments, you'll see that recurring and rolling stock are the ones we see every year. Thinking of those, in the total of the 10 million is roughly 27.3% of the overall total. And with highway and CCIT in there, which are also areas we typically fund as they're pretty fundamental to things with GTA involved and then other CIP policies, that's roughly half of the overall request. So just a little context there for you. The CIP funding amount, we won't know that until August, but obviously that's an important data point in terms of the process we're going through. So this is the initial look. It's been through an initial filter of, is it CIP, is it not? And the departments have prioritized them. So on the project, you see a number in parentheses. That's the department saying this is our number 1 through 3 or 4, whichever it is. That prioritization will dovetail into the discussion we'll have with Administrator Leonard in terms of, okay, now what is his points of view on the various projects? And after that, we bring that back to the committee. And then ultimately, again, the funding will help dictate, any further prioritization that we need prior to budget adoption and I should say budget presentation by the administrator. Moving through the areas here, there's the first blue areas in rolling stock, and I highlighted it because the Sheriff's Office adopted a fleet management program through Enterprise a few years ago. There's different options we'll come back to the committee with, but kind of give you an update about how's it going, where are we at, what does the future look like, and then there's different approaches. I think we're at a decision point anyway where it'll be good to get your input on that. But that's why it's highlighted there. We did change the policy, and I came up with a calculation to kind of try to address that 13 years of not increasing the rolling stock funding. But at the same time, we're also into this era where vehicles are getting exorbitant in cost, compared to anything we've seen in recent history. The other one below that is the highway reserve funding I mentioned. This is that large paver that I referred to a couple months ago. It's a large item. It's currently listed as being funded through the highway reserve. Ultimately, that's going to be up to you and the board as well. But I'm just calling it out and separating it from the other rolling stock calculations, which I've done the CPI averages over the last 5 years to figure out what would the annual increase be, and I've applied it to the number you see. And then I've just done a 3% assumption looking forward. Some of the assumptions are, hard to do right now with tariffs in play and other things that are influencing price because things are fluctuating a lot. But I still think it makes sense to keep those things increasing year to year, and then that actual year you're contemplating the next year's CIP, you're getting a true, okay, what is it now estimate? But it helps in terms of wrapping your head around the costs that are, down the road. The Marathon County Sheriff's Office line, this is a new one. I put it in there because this is for body cameras and tasers and third-party storage of video and information. This is a new ad. We're meeting with the Sheriff's Office in about a week and a half to get more details on it. What does it look like? So we'll bring back more to you on that. I left it under recurring because it's one of those subscriptions as a service that isn't likely going to go away. You're going to have body cams if that's where we're at. You're going to have some sort of subscription because there's very few players in the game.
If I can add the one other reason why this looks and feels a little bit more like a capital piece is, like Chris said, you have a cost every year, which is the subscription side. You know what your cost is while you have the contract. The thing that why it's a new request this year is we're in the year where we have our contract is ending. We put out an RFP, and the cost just came in substantially higher than even we anticipated, and we anticipated them coming in higher. So that's the part that is somewhat akin to a lot of the capital projects that Chris is going to get into later. We put estimates on, and we do a good job of coming up with what a project cost is going to be based on an estimate, but we really don't know what the parking lot replacement or the pick the project is going to cost until we RFP it.
Nope, that is 100% true in terms of really getting to that, what's the true cost? You don't know until it's out. And estimates we still do a very good job of that. You can do real-time estimates with vendors and try to get some assistance from what they're seeing in the world. And you can reference indices like the Producer Price Index, which refer to what like builders are experiencing versus consumers to get a truer look at certain types of projects. But nevertheless, that percentage increase I was referencing earlier, or the budget estimate may not include things where, in CCITC's world, if it's one or two companies and they've just decided the subscription is going up, everybody just has to deal with it essentially, if you're going to stick with one or the other. The replace jail intercom system, that's the next agenda item, so I won't get into it too much here. That project is built off of one that was brought through last year, and I can speak to it soon. I just wanted to address the ones right below it. They're not highlighted in blue, but it says you can split it but must fund. What I mean by that is that these are items that are projects that you could fund all up front. It's a 3-year sort of subscription as service project. So if you needed to, you could say, yes, we're going to fund it, but we're going to do it over 3 years rather than all at once. So that's what that means. The replace Superion, again, just a note where I've got in 2027, it's $3.5 million, and there's maybe 2028. This is just saying that we need to evaluate whether or not it's a 2027 project. And so we'll get eyes on that with IT and law enforcement, and it could be postponed. But because of the nut dollar figure and where it's close in the 5-year forecast, I want to just provide a little bit of that context. A unique one in the facilities and capital management line with the replace chiller for AHU 13. This is one that's a forecast as a future project, but long story short, the HVAC industry is shifting to a new refrigerant, which then requires different machines. So if you're going to try to put a package together, you can't use new refrigerant with old machines. So the reason, and this is something I'll bring back to you as well, it's slated for $225,000, but if we were to move it forward, you would save roughly $100,000 because of the amount of other equipment you would need to then change and swap out just because the refrigerant itself changed. And manufacturers are dealing with this. They don't seem to have a real clear bead on when some of these things will happen, but it's affecting everybody in the industry. I did include the new highway facility design and construction. I didn't put a number in there because that's to be determined. Also, that discussion is ongoing. I did include that you could generally estimate a 4.5% fee on a total project cost if we were thinking of what would that be, just for some additional context as that conversation unfolds. That's for the design fee. I also included the ice arena. That discussion is also something that will probably be coming back to this committee and other committees in the board in August. So the numbers are out there in the forecast, but this is, again, the board has made a decision on the mats and the repairs that came through last time, but this is going to be a decision or discussion rather, well, and decision about, the long-term prospectus, and that ties into what the county's role in the ice business is going to be. And I know there's lots of good discussion on that at that meeting, but for the sake of this discussion, I'm leaving it in there just because the committee and the boards have not come down to the final conclusion one way or the other. Let's see. That's the main talking points I had to go through in terms of the hop, skip, and a jump. I'm happy to answer questions about anything you saw and had questions about. One that may pop out at you is the ice arena cooling tower. This is something that was discussed when Parks brought for the ice arena repairs that the board approved recently. And this is something that was failing in 2022. There's been temporary repairs to it. You can continue to make repairs to it, but I think this project and a few others are a good example of will be determined in a sense of how the budget discussions unfold, but also how some of the content, substantive discussions about what it ties into unfold. So if the decision is to not do something, then clearly you'd say, okay, well, there's no need to have that in CIP. So again, just to reassure you, these are the requests. Nothing is set in stone. One last one, I should say, and this is a good example because departments who submit requests on an annual basis do a good job of it, and some departments aren't used to submitting CIP requests because it's not typically on their radar. But what I've done this year too is reminded departments really try to think down the road, like 5 years from now. Are there things that you wouldn't ever think of as CIP but really would fall under that umbrella? And the county clerk's example is a classic one because if they're going to need an election equipment update and some new tabulators, this is not something that happens very often. The county clerk almost never submits a CIP request, but this is one that we want on the forecast, even though they might think it's going to be handled some other way. So as this continues to develop and we continue to kind of get departments oriented towards that long-term thinking, I think we'll probably find some other examples that, show up in the 28, 29, 2030 window. And with that, I'll stop talking and see if you have any questions.
So there are a number of areas that are carried over, like parking lots and playground equipment replacements, where we haven't had inflationary increases in a while. I think it would be in the county's best interest if we could build some inflationary increases into some of those more ongoing areas, because our cost to resurface and replace is not going down. So in the future, if you could just begin to, on those ongoing areas, just build that in, so we don't get into the rolling stock issue.
Yep, not a problem. I can even make that adjustment for this budget discussion.
I think we can certainly, I think that makes sense for parking lots. Thankfully, we're hopefully going to have fewer of those as we move forward. My recollection on the playground equipment, which we can talk with Jamie about, is that was a 6-year project, but I might be making that up, that we're in year 5 of 6, so.
Yeah, there was a term to that one. There's another project in the future for, I think it's a catch-all. I'd have to look back at their 5-year plan, but it's true there was a limited term, and even CCITC has one where, like on the voice equipment upgrade fund, because we're moving away from phones, that dropped down to 0. So then looking ahead, we plotted in, we're going to need to readdress our new status quo in the future. So you see $40,000 down the road, and that number will go up based on CPI or other factors. But for now, it's still listed, even though it's not funded or proposed to be funded this year.
And I just would like to make a comment relative to the solid waste water treatment system. I know that's for the leachate using reverse osmosis. And we're not talking about funding today, but I would just encourage us to look at our joint venture agreement and try to get some capital costs from Shawano and Portage counties as we approach that. And sooner we have those discussions, the better.
100% agreed.
Any other questions?
noticed-
Supervisor Marshall?
Chair Robinson, thank you. I noticed that there's design of improvements to Marathon Park, and it only lists design of $1.5 million for 4 years in a row. So is that truly just design and no improvements?
That's how it's listed and referred to under the West Side Master Plan. It could be a catch-all under that plan. I didn't have the plan itself. It was just a project request form, but I'll dig into that one and get you an answer.
Thank you.
Anything else? And again, this is an early presentation. We'll see it a few more times as we go through the process, and we'll begin to put other funding sources to it and identifying what is levy supported and anything else? If not, thank you. If you want to then move on to the jail intercom system project.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. For this one, as referenced in the previous discussion, the 2025 CIP did include a intercom replacement project. What ultimately happened is, as we embarked upon the project and started digging into the intercoms themselves, it became clear that there was a lack of awareness, I suppose, on how the software was severely dated. I think it runs on Windows 7. Also, the door controls themselves needed to be replaced. Not the locking mechanism, but the controls, because they're all an integrated system. If you've ever been in a jail, somebody's talking to somebody who hits a button that activates the lock. So it's all working together. So once we saw that these two things needed to be accommodated in the overall project, not piecemealed, or you want to do it all at once. Then we dug into it, met with a vendor, did some walkthroughs to figure out, okay, what is all this? Because nobody in IT or facilities had the sort of jail-specific expertise on these controls. We did run an RFP to get design done, and that design would then inform the overall project so that the work you would do, everything would work together. And then at the end, all three items would be updated and not dated as they are now, which is some aspects of them are, 20 plus years old. So we're working with the sheriff's office too on, and the jail in terms of looking at, this, what I referenced earlier, and like looking at 5 years, what are items that maybe you didn't bring up before, but need to be brought up, or, people have heard about, but not really dug into. So these are things that once the light gets shown upon them, Jerry, myself, and others, get into action and figure out, okay, what's the situation? So the memo is explaining where we've come. The RFP is being awarded, as we speak, essentially, and the funding for that is going to come out of administration special projects funds, which ultimately allows the funding that's currently allocated for the intercoms to remain there. And then once we get the larger RFP done, we'll know what the gap is. And then how to fund the gap is, again, up to the committee and the board. I think we do have a few different options for that to draw from, but we won't really know what that looks like until we get that second RFP done. So the project grew legs, but kudos to the people who came in and got involved and really dug into it to figure out, all right, what does this actually look like, so that we could bring it to you, update you on the 2025 project, and then also explain how it's changed and why you're seeing the same thing or part of the same thing in a 2026 CIP. So essentially an update for your awareness.
Are there any questions? Now, we look forward to receiving more information on all of the above.
And I look forward to providing it.
Thank you. Connie, thank you for your patience.
The county treasurer's office, from April through June, we have sent out the lottery credit settlements paid to municipalities and the school districts. That was due in April. We're working with CPZ on assessment questions and invoiced all A convergence charges. We've completed the April interim with the city of Wausau. We are currently still in the collections of tax delinquent parcels, and the county treasurer is now receiving all second installment payments. We are also preparing documents and entries for the August settlement to the municipalities and the school districts. We prepared the remaining letters for tax delinquent parcels. We sent those out in April and May, working with Corp Counsel and admin and CCITC. We're moving all the research information to a central location. We're also verifying payoffs and notifying admin of those payoffs. Currently, the treasurer's office has collected $2.4 million in tax payments. That includes 2013 to 2023 of $270,000. Current tax year is $1.9 million. Interest and penalties of $177,000, and tax deed fees of $4,200. We are also processing lottery credits for 2025, and we are preparing for the 2025 tax year.
So the 2.4 million in tax payments netted us 177,000 in interest and penalties?
Yes. That's what we've collected so far. We continue to keep collecting delinquent taxes, so.
So what fund is, we've got that, what fund does that go into?
General fund.
Okay.
And then it's recorded underneath the treasurer's budget. There's a specific line item for interest and penalties.
Thank you. Any questions? If not, thank you. Now, Sam, you can give us your update.
So the Finance Department updates from April to current. Bank reconciliations, we transferred the responsibility into the Finance Department in March. It's been working really well. It's allowed us to better monitor payments coming in and make sure that we are getting grants recorded on time, again, assisting in that timely financial information. In July, I am planning to bring the committee a cash report as part of the monthly reporting process. In cash management, last week I conducted the first random cash audits. These were conducted with satisfactory results. It is conducted in a way where I where I reconcile what's in their cash drawer to their system, making sure that they are following the processes and procedures that we have in place, and if there's any discrepancies that they're noted, as well as answering a couple of other questions to make sure that we have alignment with cash handling processes. This will help reduce the risk of cash becoming an audit finding, which has been on our last couple of audits. So again, this is kind of responsive to that. The audit, much of April through the first part of June was allocated to the audit. Last Friday, I received the draft financial statements and I'm in the process of reviewing them. I'm continuing to work on the remaining items for the ACFR and it's on track to be completed for the 2024 financial statements. Coming up in the next month will be the audit presentation as well as the fund balance memo. Policy and procedures have been working through the fund balance policy and the working capital updates that have been presented. There will be continual progress in reviewing our current policies to ensure compliance and alignment with county's goals and strategies. Our budget, over the last few months, we've been working on enhancements to Adaptive, which is the program that we use for budgeting. Over the next month, we'll be working on the forms and documents for departments to assist in that budgeting process. Workday implementation and system enhancements. As we continue to understand Workday better, we're finding other places that we can utilize the functionality. One of those places has been the accounts payable module. The other thing that we're working on implementing is the purchase card functionality. This will allow us to take a manual process and make it more automated. I've attended a couple of joint review boards for the Village of Athens, City of Wausau, City of Stratford, and City of Colby. There's another one coming up on July 1st for City of Abbotsford. And then monthly closeout is on the plan in the next couple of months to make sure that we get to the monthly closeout process.
So are you less challenged by Workday as you get into it?
We have had a great opportunity to really understand the system and maximize how we use it.
So what does that opportunity look like in terms of frustration?
Clean up, and lots of it. We fixed a lot of, my team has fixed a lot of the mapping errors to make sure that things are hitting in the right accounts. There's some educational aspects to make sure that we understand where it should be in the reporting process. We're making sure that we're running the proper functions in the background, that if there are concerns about making sure that all the approval processes are in place or how we find out that things might be hanging out there. Again, we've had a lot of opportunities to really learn a lot about the system to make sure that we're implementing it correctly.
From a mapping perspective, you know, I know we've got some issues with employee benefits and others that show up in those, the reports that we receive. Do you anticipate that as we go along, that the number of mapping issues will be fewer and fewer? And
Yes.
that's the hope, and probably as we enter certain projects or expenditures, we may have some mapping issues, but at what point in time can you take a breath?
We're getting there. I feel a lot more confidence in where things are. Again, we've been able to identify if something's in the wrong place. Sometimes it's a system approach, or if somebody changes a setting, but we've been able to identify those things and fix them in a relatively quick manner. The other thing that will really help as we are reconciling our accounts and closing out monthly, we identify those on a quicker basis so that we're not trying to rectify something that happened several months ago or in the prior year.
I want to, personally thank you and your staff and administration for, because all of the county government has had issues, whether it's you or HR and others relative to implementation of that. And, we're not hearing of significant problems, and I think that's a testament to the commitment that you've made. So thank you.
Thank you.
I would echo that in terms of, Sam alluded to, there's the system is a great, it's a great asset to have to really okay, Sam was meeting with me hey, if you click that, you can drill down and get a lot of great information, which is wonderful. It's far different than Kayenta, where the document I got was a essentially a picture of a piece of paper that, you can't drill into you can zoom in on the picture. But they've done a lot, Sam's team, and the same is true on the HR side. And quite honestly, I think they might have had more challenges, as hard as that is, in terms of processes. But Sam has worked on the process side, like the bank rec piece she brought up, the cash audits, the closing out, getting to a place where we're closing out more promptly is all part of that adding consistency that you've heard me talk about for a long time, to get us to operate more as a single organization as opposed to 24 separate organizations. And we still have a long way to go, but, just working sheriff's office, social services were two of the big ones because, well, they're big. And now we know when, hey, why isn't this receivable? Why hasn't it been received? To make sure we're minimizing bad write-offs. All those things are really important on a process side. It's not just the system, it's the process side. And Sam has done a really good job, her and her team, on that.
Chair Gibbs.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I want to echo what the chair and the administrator has said. I want to thank first the finance department and the administration for the diligent work that they've done and the improvements that we've made. We're starting to see financial statements on a quarterly basis, and thank you for all of that effort. I guess the one question that I do have, Sam, is, and I know you had mentioned it a little bit, but I think that it's meaningful because of the timeliness. How many joint review boards are you attending or required to attend on behalf of the county on an average for the year, or for the year? Do you know?
I don't have that number on hand. Usually they will reach out to us when the time is coming. There's been a slew of them recently, so it just must be their time in the process. We had quite a few in the fall, and then it kind of slowed down a little bit in the springtime.
Because I do know that it does impact, obviously, your capacity, because the amount of time that it does take, the review of the information that each of those TIDs have, and so I thank you for your work on that.
Any other questions for Finance Director? If not, thank you. The next item, I've been having discussions with Lance, and given the uncertainty of what's happening at both the state and the federal level, I think I said, well, I would like to begin the discussion of what those implications might be. And as I just want to put a precautionary note, is that everything I say is as of today or some time ago, because it is dynamic at both the state and the federal level. I did share with you, and there are some great opportunities for you to participate. I know that Wisconsin Counties Association has a weekly leadership call on Monday mornings, and they have their capital report on every 2-week basis, where they will cover different things that are happening relative to the budget. You, as a member of the county board, also have access to the Wheeler Report and WisPolitics that provide updates periodically on what's going on in Madison. And if you aren't subscribed, just contact the Wisconsin Counties Association, give them your email, and they'll put you on the list. And the WisPolitics also is a tie into state affairs, and there's great information that's available. And maybe we'll start with the state and the budget process, and maybe we should look to Scott and have you give the update. But it's subject to on again, off again discussions.
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if they did wrap it up fairly quick. I know next week, the 30th, of course, coming up the deadline. But, it's hard to tell at this point. I don't know where it is to say an update. One thing I do know in the state budget, the legislature is looking just basically for one-time expenditures. They have uncertainties, what's going on at the federal level too. So they're not looking to fund ongoing programs so much. So that's a strategy they're adopting that we may consider as well.
And one of the things we've heard at the Wisconsin Counties Association is that they're very reluctant to allocate any additional general purpose revenue for any programs. And toward that end, one of the biggest asks of the Counties Association and through the County Ambassador Program and through meetings with that Chair Gibbs has hosted. Regionally, we've talked about funding for the courts, and there's a $72 million shortfall where counties are paying much more of the cost than the state is, and it should be more closer to a 50-50 partnership. The Joint Finance has allocated $20 million toward picking up the cost, which will create some opportunities for us to reduce our subsidy levy support for it. And they're also looking at increasing fees and sharing in those fees with the counties as a way of offsetting that. There have been a number of other discussions. I know that the district attorney was encouraged by the fact that they picked up additional attorneys statewide, but disappointed because they weren't in Marathon County. And perhaps there will be some ongoing discussions. And again, the budget isn't final until the budget's final. Shared revenue payments is driven pretty much off of a formula, and many of the big items, and correct me if I'm wrong, have been sort of put onto the table with the discussions with the governor, whether it deals with childcare, school aids, tax relief, and others. I don't believe general transportation aid has been determined as of yet, which were critical issues to the county, but that's, and I'm not sure that they fully understand some of the ramifications of what's happening on the federal level. There are some of the provisions on the federal level will result in the state picking up more administrative costs for Medicaid programs and some of the other programs and potentially impact activities. But the state doesn't seem to be as concerning because they're not generally talking about cuts to programs. It's, will you have an increase? I know the VA services offices, Veterans Affairs Service offices got a modest increase, and there were some others, but they've been slow in making those decisions. On the federal level, again, you've got reconciliation, the budget. We have a lot of things that are taking place that could impact with you. I shared with you a presentation that was given at the Wisconsin Counties Association leadership meeting and by the local health department organization, Wisconsin Local Health Departments. But I think one of the things to look at in there is on a statewide basis, 29% of the funding for local health departments comes from the feds, and Wisconsin has the unique situation of having the least state subsidy of local public health programs in the country. And that's been a case, so you can't cut there, but there are impacts that are coming up, but some of the ones that will impact us are the significant cuts to the public health emergency preparedness. What did you figure that could? Sure.
So a good little math problem to have in your head, or a ratio to have in your head, anytime you see an allocation of, in this instance, I'll use the public health emergency preparedness allocation. So again, federal pass-through to the state, to counties, you'll see the reference, $5.2 million went to local health departments in 2023-24. Similar to ARPA, that allocation of federal to state to counties, I always keep 2.3% in my head. Marathon County is about 2.3% of any allocation if the state follows population. That's what we end up getting. So applying that simple metric, when I saw this presentation come out, $5.2 million, 2.3% of that is about $120,000, $119,000. Well, we have been having conversations with Interim Health Officer Amanda Ostrowski, Sam and I were just emailing yesterday about this exact topic. And when we drill into the actual numbers, it turns out that 2.3% is pretty close. We're at about between $92,000 and $100,000 for the kind of how that component shakes out on the public health emergency preparedness side. You flip down then to the state prevention block grant, again, that passed through. The $745,000 went to local health departments in 2022, 23. Applying that 2.3%, you're at about $17,000. I am confident, based on, the conversations we've had to this point, we will have a plan for you as to what that looks like. The health department has done very well. Again, we were just emailing yesterday about this scheduling meeting to really make sure we're all on the same page. But the cut we know is coming is that public health emergency preparedness piece, which again puts us in that, I think, to be conservative, say $100,000, $92,000 to $100,000. We already have some strategies on that. The bigger piece, again, if you were on this WCA presentation, the part that when Chair Robinson talks about a significant amount of funding for local health departments and for perhaps even, not perhaps, more importantly or more acutely in other areas, Medicaid and those other areas. Depending on what comes down, those are the revenues that would be much more of a challenge for us. And you look at that in terms of if substantial changes were made that impacted CCS, or Comprehensive Community Services funding, in the social services, and very importantly, North Central. Children's long-term support reimbursements, social services. North Central with nursing home reimbursements. Those are the areas that, there's been a lot of discussion, but really, truly, we don't have any clarity on what those are. And my approach is generally, rather than spend time game planning against a game, I don't even know what game is being played. I'll wait to get some sense of certainty as to what we're looking at. Again, the certainty we have is on the public health emergency preparedness decrease. We know the state has communicated to us to expect a decrease. We know what our funding stream is. I referenced that before, $100,000. So we are going to be bringing to the appropriate committees an update on that in the near term. But as for the rest, as alluded to by Chair Robinson and Supervisor Poole, I guess we'll wait to see what comes from that federal discussion and what comes on the state side. Because again, the state, depending on what happens at the federal level, there could be a decision by the state to step into that funding void or not. I mean, that's an affirmative policy question they need to make. As Chair Robinson referenced, Wisconsin is the most heavily reliant upon federal funding in terms of our public health system in the country. There are other areas where, again, we're quite honestly much better positioned than other states, but we'll find out more as time goes on. But I do want to just, again, my point I communicate to staff is often, like, let's take a breath. Where are we at? What do we know? And what we know right now is really on the public health emergency preparedness side.
We also, when you look at the federal government, and Chair Gibbs just shared with me this afternoon slides from the National Association of Counties bi-weekly meeting where they gave a presentation, but the Energy and Commerce Committee on the federal level is looking for cuts. They have $8.8 trillion in mandatory health spending, and that they review. 8.2 of that is associated with Medicaid. Now, we didn't take advantage of the expansion of Medicaid in Wisconsin, so we may not be hit as a state is bad, but 93% of the mandatory health spending is in Medicaid on the federal level. They are looking at a number of changes, including expanding work requirements to the population that would be required to have the 80 hours a month of work, and looking at additional administration work that may or may not impact the Department of Social Services as they look at eligibility and enrolling people through their income, I think through the income maintenance program and some of the verifications. So there may be ramifications to our staff with additional workflow relative to checking in on those people for eligibility and others. They are talking about potentially imposing a $35 copay. One of the concerns that I would have is that copays tend to stop people from seeking services, and so they go away from the preventative services and they present themselves with a more acute situation. I think that the counties association has articulated a need to evaluate those for rural areas and children and mothers, and they're advocating for a number of things. The question is when will those provisions take effect? I think they were looking, National Association of Counties was looking at 2029. I think that's been moved up to 2026, and there's an effort to try to push it back to 2027, which would create a workload. But there are eligibility for the Supplemental Nutrition Aid Program, SNAP, is up there, and what the funding level would impact access to food for a number of people. The SNAP Ed program from Preventative Health, where we do FoodWise, and working through the University of Wisconsin Extension offices, try to educate people about good nutrition, and availability is potentially at risk. And generally speaking, when the county has received a grant from the federal government, we have stated that if the grant goes away, the county doesn't pick up the staff or the support for those programs, so they're sort of on their own. So if there are members that desire to do that, they would need to come in with a funding source, but generally we haven't, we've been careful to tie funding and positions that are funded to the funding. So if they go away, the funding goes away. There are numerous other areas, but I thought we just ought to begin the discussion. I think that if you look at, as I look at it, probably the three departments that I think maybe most suspect would be health, social services, and to a degree emergency management, where some of the discussions relative to FEMA and the role of where FEMA is and whether that's a state responsibility or a federal responsibility would come into play in some of the preparedness. I know we were looking at the potential for a safe house or safe room. I think those opportunities are gone. Chair Gibbs.
I think the other entity that's going to be affected, potentially can be affected or will be affected, depending on what the changes are, and I think the chair has alluded to some of the changes that are being discussed. At least the House has already obviously passed their their resolution, HR 1, and the Senate is working on it. And at some point, there is distinct differences between the Senate version and the House version. Those will have to be reconciled at some point because they'll have to be passed by the House will have to either take up what the Senate approves or they'll have to create a conference committee to work out the differences. But the other entity that may have some significant impacts would be NCHC because they and a lot of their programs are Medicaid and Medicare related funding sources for those individuals.
Supervisor Lemmer.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. I, too, am worried about the ADRC because of the number of funds that we get and the positions that are attached to that funding. So I think what I would like to know is if it's our responsibility as a board to decide if we're going to protect some of these positions, I'm going to need a list of potential positions that could go so I know in advance who or what programs that I think are important that I would advocate for.
Chair Gibbs.
What I would say, though, is as the administrator has pointed out, I know we don't know. Reconciliation is a process. and is not the funding. It is the what do I want to call it? It's the structure at which the programs are to be modeled after. The budget is separate of that. And so we don't know, at this point, it's too early in the process to actually know what's going to actually happen. Again, reconciliation, the bill ends up covering a 10-year period, and implementation of when those fundings and what the budget actually funds is a separate project, is a separate entity.
If I can.
Administrator Leonard.
To your question, Supervisor Lemmer, I think I understand the ask, and we can certainly do that. I would focus more on programs as opposed to positions, because sometimes we have positions, we have individuals that do various different things, and if you want to have, in the health department budget, we have a lot of relatively small grants, so people are working on multiple different things and their funding streams are different, but I can certainly bring to you, okay, what is a change in our public health emergency preparedness program? What does that look like if we do end up not receiving $92,000 to $100,000? What are the implications? To have, so you guys can have that, it really strikes me as it's a programmatic and service level conversation. Do you want to shift the funding stream to fill that void?
Let me just point out that my understanding of the joint agreement that created the ADRC is that the levy is frozen unless all of the counties agree to increase the levy. So I think one of the discussions that needs to take place at the ADRC level is whether or not there's a opportunity, willingness, or interest in looking at the base level of county support for ADRC programming, because I think there are some constraints within the organization itself. So, Supervisor Lemmer.
So, separating the ADRC from that, we have a board that, has been discussing this, but I just look at, let's just say SNAP Ed, for example. If that goes away and you're saying we're not going to fund that unless if we come to the board with a proposal, those are people that will be losing their jobs. And I think, I get it, I want to pay attention to programs, but if it's a program that is going away that might have a person go away, I think we need to know that transparently up front, so we can see the domino effects of these cuts that are being made and how it impacts staff.
But there is no mechanism right now by which the county automatically picks those up. I think that needs to be understood. So the process would be as if county board members are concerned relative to cuts impacting programs, and I think that's the best way to describe it, they need to be proactive relative to introducing proposals that would address that.
If I can, I think there are also a good place to start. Sorry, I apologize if I'm interjecting. That mandatory discretionary program document that each of the committees are going to receive in your next committee meetings. And we can have, staff are the ones that if you have, we can articulate, hey, what do we foresee right now based on the information we have? I can tell you a lot of our answer is going to be, we don't know yet. But to your specific question on SNAP education, FoodWise funded program. FoodWise is carried out. It's a partnership between the county and the state. The state side is the people. We provide the state obligation through our annual contract with UW Extension is the office space. So really a great question for Madison. Are you going to step in and should the SNAP education funding from the federal government go away, the administration go away, is the state going to supplement that funding, or are they going to essentially not, and put that question then to the counties, the counties going to step in and administer SNAP education on a local level? We haven't historically done that. Again, the contract between the counties, that agreement between the counties and the state 3W Extension as we provide the kind of the support, the office space, some funding for some of those things, and then the state delivers the service through the people. But great question. I mean, that's why I think that document is a helpful frame rather than people. Because first of all, that gets just complex. But programmatically, if there's a programmer service that is anticipating funding impacts, what does that look like operationally absent funding coming in the budget? And then the county board has the you have the unenviable task of allocating funding to the things that you prioritize in a world where there's not enough funding to do all the good things you want to do. But that document is a great place to start.
I'll just repeat, it's hard to be proactive if I don't have the information. So when the information is available, I think it's important to get that information to us.
We will, as we move ahead, and I share some of those concerns, but we need a process by which we can advance those and for consideration. And I think it is important that we try to, as early as possible, understand the potential ramifications upon the citizens of the county. So, Chair Gibbs.
Yeah, I think the other thing that, at this point, the proposed timeline that we're seeing, at least the Senate is looking to have a vote on the quote-unquote one big beautiful bill by July 4th. I think that's a little aggressive. I don't know that that's going to come to pass, but that's the initial thoughts. And then because there will be differences between that and the House version at that point, then there's two potential options. One is the bill that the Senate passes goes back to the House, and they could take that bill up and as the Senate approved it, and either pass it or they create a conference committee, and the conference committee then has to work out the two differences between the two. But I think, we will probably have some kind of indication, but again, separate from that is the budget, and the budget is been proposed by the president at this point with a 20-some% cut in discretionary spending, but that's separate from the reconciliation process and the one big beautiful bill.
And we will again be revisiting this issue on a regular basis as we know more from the state and understand potential ramifications on the federal level. So anything else? And if any other members have information from their contacts, please feel free. We'll put this on the agenda please feel free to bring that in and share that with the committee. Anything else? If not, our next meeting is on July 9th. Do you have any other items that you'd like to see us take up at that time or in the future? We will have the audit report presentation at our second meeting in July. John Rader, will John be here? From Baker Tilly will be here, and I'm sure we'll have questions. And I think it'd be healthy if you have concerns about how some of the fund balances and proprietary fund balances are set, to have that discussion at that time with him, and Sam will be here as well. We will have the working capital and fund balance policy there. We need to, at the next meeting, begin talking about budget priorities and assumptions, so there will be no shortage for us, and that might be a good opportunity, Supervisor Lemmer, for you to bring up some of those other issues in terms of our priorities. Anything else? If not, what are your wishes? Chair Gibbs.
Make a motion to adjourn?
Motion by Gibbs, seconded by Supervisor Poole to adjourn. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? No. We are adjourned. Thank you. Well, I want to be careful that we not